Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get right back to it. Let's find out what God said, and let's go do it. First thing I want to do right now, and I've done this before, but this needs to happen every few months to kind of jog people's memory. People don't believe God's word. People don't believe much of anything that He says, and what little they believe, they'll twist it and turn it until they've turned it into a lie. That's what the church does. That's how the church keeps going. That's why Satan continues to keep the church going. It's his church. But that's how he does it. If somebody comes up with the truth, no, get him out of here. We don't want him. We want to hear what makes us feel good. What rocks our little world, What crushes it, as they say today in the papers and everything. Now, what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to take just a few of the heathen doctrines and beliefs and customs that the church swears by. The church they'll fight you over this. They'll just get angry at you, and they might even attack you if they felt they'd get away with it over these rebellions against God's word. And I'm going to give you the title, I'm going to give you the subject, then I'm going to tell you what the church says, and I'm going to tell you what God says about it. Let's start with the Sabbath. Ladies and gentlemen, why do I always start with the Sabbath? Because James said, or God said through James, if you doubt one of those commandments, then you doubt them all. If you reject one of them, you've rejected them all, and you become a worker of iniquity. And Jesus said, I will say to them on the day of judgment, depart from me, you workers of iniquity, I never knew you. Oh, but Lord, I've been in the church all my life. I've preached and I've missionaried, and I've got a drawer full of perfect attendance pins, and I'm on the street and I'm handing out pamphlets, and it'll say, depart from me, you workers of iniquity, I never knew you. And which commandment is the easiest one to disobey? Well, the Sabbath, of course. We are told to prove everything by the word. Jesus said on the Mount of on the Mount Sinai, and then he wrote this in stone. He said, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. That it and the are what's called definite articles. In other words, there ain't no other ones. Just that one. Just that Saturday Sabbath. Not the Sunday Sabbath that the church has embraced, but the seventh day Sabbath. Remember from where? These people had been in slavery for 400 years. See, these were the children, grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Joseph, and these people. And they didn't even know anything about it except what was handed down to them verbally. And he said, you go back to the Garden of Eden and you remember that Sabbath. And ladies and gentlemen, there was not a Jew one, not an Israelite one in the Garden of Eden. The Sabbath he created for all men, for all mankind for all times. How about Christmas? Jesus said in Jeremiah 10, first 5 verses, he said, learn not the ways of the heathen. He said in another place, the ways of the heathen are an abomination to me, because, he said in Jeremiah, they'll go out into a forest, they'll cut down a tree, they'll bring it into their homes, they'll decorate it with gold and silver. What does that sound like? It's Christmas. That's the ways of the heathen. Well, you know what you always hear? What I always hear? Well, that's not why I do it. That's not why I observe Christmas or Easter, or that's not why I do these things. It doesn't matter why. He said don't do it. If we allow why or the reason to dictate anything, well, then you could have a prostitute who sells her body and says, well, it's okay with God because I give the money to the church. That solves the problem, doesn't it? So he doesn't care why. He says what? Do not do that. Okay. Denominations. Well, denominations are good because, and they give themselves away with this one, that allows each of us to worship in our own way. In our own way. We can go anywhere we want. Well, that great evangelist, that world famous evangelist that I told you about. One time I was watching him back before I knew any better, and this is one of the things that got the truth through to me. And he had held a big revival and had an altar call, which is not scriptural. The idea that you're going to get saved just by walking up and going through the motions. But anyhow, after he had done this, he had passed out some information. Then he says to these people, now you go back to your home areas and join the church of your choice. In other words, scout around, find out which one scratches your ears the best, which one does what you want to do, and join up. It doesn't matter. Well, in a sense, it really didn't matter because none of them were of God. Still are. Well, his son is having a big revival over here in Longview, starting sometime next week, I think. And they're just going to bring salvation to the masses. No, what they're going to do is sucker some people into these denominational or Catholic churches. That's what they're going to do. And that just seals them off from God. God said, come out of that mess. Come out and be separate and don't even touch it. Don't get close enough to touch it. I got thinking about that word touch. I thought, where had I heard that before? Go back to the Garden of Eden. Look at what Eve said. Satan said to her, can you eat of every tree of the garden? And Eve said, no, there's that one tree. God said that we must not eat of it. We must not even touch it. What's the deal here with touching it? Because if you get close enough to touch it, you get close enough to have it to influence you. That's what he's talking about. When you come out of these godless churches, don't get anywhere near them. Don't even get close. Don't go in there unless it's just absolutely necessary for a funeral or a wedding or something. Have nothing to do spiritually with those people. Don't touch them. He said, when he said come out, he said, come out of her, my children. Separate yourself from that unclean thing. Touch it not. Don't touch it. Stay out of it. The rapture of all the nonsense. I saw this thing, and I probably told you this, and you've probably seen it, but there's this world famous actor who makes these movies, and he had a movie, Left Behind type movie, and they're on this airplane, and suddenly, things begin to happen, and look around, people are disappeared, and what really got me, I think I probably laughed out loud at this one, but in one of the seats, here sits a pair of pants and a shirt and shoes and nobody in them. I just, oh my God in heaven. That's all, that was a myth. A woman named MacDonald, Margaret MacDonald, back in I believe the 1600s and along in there, had this dream or vision in which people were going up, and of course the church jumped on that, and the first thing they know, it became truth. There's no truth to it, ladies and gentlemen. There will not be a rapture of the believers before or even midway of the Great Tribulation. It's not going to happen, and don't let any of these false prophets sell you that sack of baloney. All right, we are going to rise to meet Christ, but it's when He comes back to get us. This rapture is supposed to be secret. It's a secret rapture. We'll just be sitting there, and all at once the guy next to us will be gone. People will be driving down the highway, and all at once nobody driving the car. Only thing sitting there is some clothes, and the car is going to go off the highway. Planes will crash, and all of this nonsense. Well, let me just read what God said about when Jesus returns. He's going to return one more time. and it won't be secret. Listen to what he says, Matthew 24:27. He said, lightning will flash from east to west, and it's all over the world. People all over the world will be able to see it. Then, he said, will the coming of the Son of Man be. That's when the coming will be. In 1 Thessalonians 4:16, he talks about this. He said, there will be a trumpet blast. There will be the voice of the archangel, and the Son of Man will appear, and the sign of the Son of Man will appear. Does that sound secret to you? Doesn't sound secret to me. A trumpet blast? The voice of an archangel? Lightning from east to west? No, ladies and gentlemen, that rapture is a myth, and don't let anybody tell you different. The law has been nailed to the cross. Did you know that? If you ask 500,000 professing Christians if the law was nailed to the cross, every one of them will say yes. No, it wasn't. The law is what God uses to qualify us. The law is what defines sin and righteousness. 1 John 3:4 says, to transgress or break the law is sin. For sin is a transgression of the law. Ladies and gentlemen, 1 John is in the New Testament. And he's talking to this lawyer, and this lawyer said, what must I do to be saved, or something about salvation? And he said, well, what does it say in the law? And he told him the first two verses. He said, you do that, and you'll be saved. Well, the first two verses are just a condensation of all 10. When you obey the first two, you obey all 10 of them, because they're all the same. The first 4 tells you how to relate to God. The others tell you how to relate to man. Well, that's what the next 8 are all about. So he was saying that the law, the 10 commandments, you must obey them. Remember the rich man? Came running to Jesus, dropped on his knees and said, Master, what must I do to be saved? He said, obey the law. He said, well, which one? Or obey the commandments. Which one? And Jesus began to relate them. He said, oh, I've done all those all of my life. He said, that's good. That's fine. He said, and he loved him. He loved this man. But the man said, but Jesus said to him, but now you have one problem. You have one sin. You've done everything you're supposed to do. You're set, except for this one sin. And the man went away sad, because he knew he would not ever be saved for that one sin, you see. So people think, well, I'm just a sinner saved by grace, but I'm saved. No, this man missed out on salvation for one sin. The Lord is serious about this, ladies and gentlemen. This is not a game. There's no such thing as a sinner saved by grace. Because you're not saved in this lifetime. And if you're converted, you're getting that sin out of your life as quickly as you can in order to keep your conversion. The holy days. God tells us to observe the holy days. The book of Acts. Read the book of Acts. And you find the disciples time and time and time again, specifically Paul, going to certain cities to observe a particular holy day in that city. Pentecost, Passover, trumpets, the Day of Atonement. All of these are mentioned in there. And he says, I want to get to Jerusalem in time for Pentecost. He said, we were here, and I'm going to stay here wherever it was until Passover. Well, why? To participate in those activities, those holy day activities. Inherited sin, you know where that came from. I've told you before. In North Africa, a place called Hippo. Now we're talking about Adam's sin being passed down. And I'll end with this one. In that area there was a priest named Augustine. Of course he's Catholic. And even he, though, had enough sense to know that children are not sinners. You're not born in sin. They knew that back in those days. So where did this idea of being born in sin or with Adam's sin come from? Well, here's the story on that. Augustine he was faced with a pretty serious problem. because there was an epidemic going around that's killing a lot of people, including children. And so the parents wanted to make sure that those children were baptized before they died. We're talking babies. We're talking 2 or 3 day old babies and this type of thing. And he said, or at least he reasoned that well, there's no reason to baptize them, because baptism is to wash away your past sins, and they have no sins. But the parents insisted, and they put so much pressure on him, he had to come up with something. Well, he came up with this idea that we got our sin from Adam. And so these babies were sinners. They had sin, and so he could baptize them. Well, anything good becomes truth real quick, like the rapture. If it's good and it makes you feel good and it makes your flesh feel good and you feel wise and you feel a warm fuzzy all over, feel very religious, that's good, and it doesn't matter what it is. Today it's homosexuality. Makes people feel so good that we're so enlightened that we're letting everybody in now. Till next time, study the Word of God.